Hey, what's up, guys? It's Bakes here, and thank you for joining me for today's episode of my random horror reviews. Today's movie, we have a remake. It's actually one of my favorite remakes. I really like this movie. Today's film is from 2006, and it is The Hills Have Eyes. First of all, I'll just quickly say I also really like the original Hills Have Eyes by Wes Craven. I really like that movie actually, but I've always given the slight edge to the remake. I think I like this movie a little bit more. You could put that down to like the small added details that they put into this movie and sort of the modernized brutality compared to the first. But even the OG is actually quite brutal for a movie that is from that time. But yeah, I've always given the slight edge to the remake but as I said, I really do like Wes Craven's original as well. This is my set with the remake and then the sequel to the remake, which isn't as good. It has its moments, but it's not a great film by any means. But either way, focusing on the first remake from 2006. So before we get into my thoughts of this movie, let's quickly go into the plot for this one. So in this film, we have a family who is traveling to California, and they're driving down a desert in New Mexico, and they get tricked into taking this shortcut. They have an accident, their car is totaled, and not only now do they have to survive the elements, they also have to survive a family of cannibalistic, inbred, mutated people living off in the hills, and they start to pick them off. So that's the story for this one, and let's get into my thoughts of the remake of The Hills Have Eyes from 2006. So where I want to start with my thoughts of this movie is where I feel like is the obvious place to start, and that is the setting, because the setting is so fucking awesome in this movie and equally terrifying. Like this isolated dry desert, like no other cars, like you're out there alone, and then the hills themselves, they're like these big fucking canyons just made of rock. And they're almost like characters in of themselves. They're just so creepy and haunting. But then add in the fact that there's people up there watching you. Like you can't see them, but they can see you clear as day. That is like genuinely fucking terrifying. Like I can't think of anything fucking scarier. But I love it. The family relationship in this movie, I also really fucking love as well. The dynamic is really cool. I've always loved the choice of having a extended family in this movie. Like the typical setup is like the husband, wife, situation where there's 2 or 2.5 kids. In this one, like you have the son-in-law, and it sort of sounds weird, but like there's 2 dogs that are owned by this family as well, and they're like characters in of themselves. Like everyone knows Beauty and Beast in the Hills Have Eyes films, and they play big roles as well. So yeah, there's sort of like this extended family situation going on. I really like that. You have the head of the family, Big Bob, who is like a retired detective, so he's got like these guns on him and he thinks he's like the fucking head honcho, but I really like his character. It's not in like a cocky way that he struts around, but he is the big dog. He sort of has tension with the son-in-law, who is like a cell phone salesman and all that, so they don't really see eye to eye. But then you have like the actual son stepping up, little Bob. Yeah, I just really like the family dynamic in this movie. I think that's really well done also. So I also really like the added choice in this remake compared to the original to make the people up in the hills mutated by nuclear radiation compared to them just being a family of inbred cannibal mountain people. And not like there's anything tame about the original film having them be a family of inbred mountain cannibals. That is still fucking terrifying and creepy and gross. But having the backstory of the nuclear testing site and the radiation effects that happened to these people, I think is a nice touch. It also kind of plays into the themes of these 2 families that gets brought up in this movie. So you have the first family, which is our protagonists in this film, the typical all-American family that you would just sort of picture. But then on the other hand, you have this nuclear mutated family that are just sort of doing their own thing to survive. Like they need to eat, they need to get by and everything. Obviously, the way that they go about it is not how you would expect people to go about it, but they're doing their shit to survive. There's even a scene in this movie where one of the mutants is talking to Doug, the son-in-law, and he says how they wouldn't be the way that they are if it wasn't for the government, the typical Americans. Because the backstory in this one is the government were trying to force these people out of the hills where they live, and they're like, you need to go, we're gonna fucking use this place as a nuclear testing site, and they're like, nah, and they pretty much force them off into the mines, and obviously wasn't far enough and they got mutated, and over generations, shit just kept getting more and more fucked up. So there's sort of a theme of, I guess, classism in a way. And as I said, it sort of comes into play, but I don't think the message completely lands. I do feel like it's really trying to push it at a certain part in this movie, but I do feel like it sort of benefits more as just a deeper detail, as I said, an added bonus to the backstory rather than commentary or something else like that. So getting into the brutality in this movie now, because this movie's known for being fairly brutal, but I actually think it's a great option for people who are looking for a horror movie that's a little bit more dirty and nasty and grimy without going into torture porn territory, because I'm very much like that as well. I love movies that are grimy and nasty like this, and you almost feel like you need a shower afterwards. But it's not torture porn, it's not just pure smut and filth, and it's like, what the fuck was the point of this movie? Like, I like when the brutality is done like something like this, it's very much up the alley of something like House of a Thousand Corpses or Devil's Rejects or something, it's not just pure smut and filth for the sake of it. Like, I feel like it's done a little bit better in something like this. Getting back on topic, like, the feeling of this movie, like, first of all, it's just very hot because it takes place in the desert, and it feels like it's nasty and dirty, and then when shit hits the fan, and if I have to pinpoint exactly where shit hits the fan in this movie, I'll say the first attack on the family in their caravan, or whatever you want to call it, and shit is just crazy brutal, and not just brutal, but, like, intense. Like, there's a point after that first attack on the family where I'm like, shit, was I just holding my breath that whole time? Like, shit starts to mellow out, and I'm like, fuck, I can, like, finally breathe, because it's really intense, it's really nasty, and, as I said, this whole film, there's so much brutal shit. Like, you got people burning alive, you got SA, I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say, like, R word in this movie, you got kidnapping, and you got just straight up, like, normal violence and gore, like blood and everything as well. But I think what really pushes it is director Alexander Aja. First of all, great director. If you're not familiar with him, he's done so many great horror movies, really underrated, and I think it was a great choice to make him the director of this modernized, more brutal version of the Hills Have Eyes story, which, as I said in my introduction, the original Wes Craven's Hills Have Eyes film is actually a lot more brutal than what I think a lot of people remember it being. But I think it was sort of a little bit also of a product of its time, so a more modernized version where you can push the envelope a little bit more. As I said, I think Alexander Aja was a great choice to put him in the reins of directing. I can just imagine, like, studios seeing his French film High Tension and just being like, you know what, let's give him a go at remaking The Hills Have Eyes and see what he can do, and I think he did a great job. So as you can probably tell from this review, I do really like this movie. I think it is very good, but I wouldn't go so far to say that it's perfect or there is nothing wrong with it at all. Like I said before, the commentary in this movie I don't feel like hits the nail on the head. I actually do appreciate what they're trying to do and add a little bit more to it, but I feel like it more so benefits as a little bit more backstory and history to the people off in the hills, rather than commentary and themes on classism and all that. As I said, I can appreciate what they were trying to do, but didn't quite hit the nail on the head in my opinion. There are some points towards the end of the film that I do feel like is a little bit too much, as in maybe a few too many scenes that I don't necessarily feel like need to be there, and they sort of just add to the third act to make it drag out a little bit longer, which, as I said, I don't feel like need to necessarily be there. But at least I do feel like this movie does what I think a good remake should do, and that is, first of all, don't make a shot-for-shot remake of the original film. First of all, that's pointless, especially when the original film is as strong as what the original Hills Have Eyes is. Still try to make it its own thing, just try and add to what makes the original so good. But then also don't butcher the blueprints of the OG. Don't make it to the point where it's unrecognizable and people are forgetting the elements of what made the original shine. Like, if I was ever to remake a film, first of all, I wouldn't pick a movie that I think is perfect and I love, because I know I just wouldn't be able to do it as good as what the original was, and I don't want to butcher a film that I fucking love. But then I also wouldn't pick something that I don't necessarily care about and just, be like, I'll have a go at it. I would pick something that I think has really strong elements, but the execution wasn't quite there. Maybe like a good example is like a film that has a really good story, but like the execution didn't quite land. I think a really good example is the film The Hills Run Red. If you've seen that movie, I actually watched it not too long ago, and that thought sort of came to mind. It's a weird one because I feel like the movie's still a little bit too modern to be remade, but I feel like The Hills Run Red has a really good fucking story, but the execution isn't quite there. I'd actually really like to see a higher budgeted remake of The Hills Run Red because I think the story is really cool. But either way, I'm getting off topic. As I said, I still really do like this movie. It's one of my favorite remakes. I think it just does a lot of things right. It adds to the brutality. As I said, a great option for people who are looking for a horror movie that's a little bit more nasty and gross feeling without being torture porn. Don't get me wrong, there are actually a few good torture porn movies out there. You have Hostel and I recently rewatched some of the Human Centipedes again, and I've done reviews of those movies. I think they're actually okay, but things that are pure snuff and just weird shit like Sailor and those movies to me don't click, and I know a lot of people sort of tiptoe around them, but I love movies like this. As I said, very similar vibe to something like House of a Thousand Corpses and Devil's Rejects and there's plenty of other movies, but they're the two that are stuck in my head right now. To give this a rating out of 10, I'm going to give The Hills Have Eyes remake from 2006, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I really do like this movie. I think it's quite solid. So yeah, let me know your thoughts if you've seen the movie before in the comments below. Even if you don't want to talk about this movie, let me know some of your remakes, favorite remakes, and maybe if I haven't seen them, I'll check them out, but or maybe just do a review of them sometime down the track. But thank you for joining me for this episode of my random horror review, guys, and I'll see you for another video soon. Peace.